the lynx braced in the crosswalk, breath curling through the cold as tires hissed toward us and his spotted body locked into a silent warning. His ears flattened, muscles gathered, and I felt a sharp pull in my chest, the same fear and trust that once carried us down a stormed mountain. Snow drifted around his steady frame as I stepped between danger and the heartbeat beside me. But before this morning on Oak Street, life had been quiet. The sofa warm and ordinary before the first strange signs appeared. Elly always noticed the silence first when she came home from the climbing shop. The little town below the ski runs hushed early in winter, leaving the river and the distant highway to do most of the talking. Inside her second floor place, the radiators ticked and sighed, and her green sofa waited under the lamplight like a loyal friend. Still, lately, there was something else in the air, a faint awareness that made her pause with her hand on the door, as if someone had just walked out of the room. The first time she felt it, she blamed herself. She was tired, shoulders sore from hauling ropes at the shop and stocking shelves with crampons. She thought the room looked slightly rearranged, but in the soft lamplight, everything was exactly where she left it. Only the throw blanket on the sofa sagged inward, like something heavy had recently been resting there. Elly ran her fingers through the dent, laughed at herself, and turned on the TV for background noise anyway. A week later, she woke before dawn to a sound, soft but unmistakable, a weight landing on the floor from somewhere higher. Not the thin knock of pipes or her neighbour's boots, but a solid, living thump. Her heart punched once, hard. She listened, holding her breath, expecting another step that never came. The apartment settled back into stillness, but her skin stayed alert, tingling, even after she made coffee. Snow crept down the mountain that month, turning the streets into pale tunnels under yellow streetlights. Each evening, Elly stomped her boots on the mat outside her door. One night she had to move one of them aside. It had shifted just enough to keep the door from opening smoothly. She frowned at the faint smear of slush leading away down the hallway, too narrow to be from anyone's shoes. She checked with the elderly neighbour across the hall. He shook his head, said nobody had been up there all afternoon. Another night, she noticed the glass on the balcony door. There, low on the pane, was a little fogged oval, as if a warm nose had pressed and breathed against it, then pulled away. Outside, the rail had a dusting of snow, marked with small, neat depressions that didn't quite match the birds she sometimes saw. Elly rubbed the glass clean with her sleeve. She told herself a raccoon could climb that high, though she had never seen one this close to downtown. Her body felt it before her mind admitted anything was strange. Walking from the kitchen to the living room, she would step more carefully at the threshold, feeling as if she might bump into something invisible. The hollow in the green sofa appeared more often, deeper some days than others. Once, reaching for the TV remote, she snatched her hand back without thinking, a reflex that made no sense in an empty room. "You're just lonely," she muttered, annoyed with herself. Yet the small signs kept repeating. Scratches appeared low on the hallway wall. 4 neat lines that hadn't been there when she moved in. A strand of pale hair gleamed against her dark rug. Not from her. Not from anyone she knew. Elly picked it up and felt a tiny shiver of recognition she couldn't place. Twice she swept and mopped, telling herself she was starting fresh. Twice she caught herself glancing over her shoulder while she worked. One evening, as the last light slid off the snowy ridge, she turned off the TV and sat still, listening. The building creaked. The radiator hissed, and the wind folded itself around the eaves. Under it all came a quiet, rhythmic sound, almost like breathing, not hers, from near the sofa. It stopped the instant she shifted her weight. "That's it," she whispered, standing. "Tomorrow, I'm checking for vents, loose boards, anything." But even saying it, she knew the unease went deeper than a simple draft. The next morning, she found fresh marks on the balcony, a little trail across the snow pressed right up against her sliding door. Whatever passed through here wasn't getting in by mistake. It was coming to this exact spot, over and over. Elly stood barefoot in the thin cold seeping through the glass, rubbing her arms. Something was watching this place, maybe watching her. She had no name for it yet, only the steady feeling that she was not, and had not been for some time, entirely alone. The first real glimpse came on a Sunday afternoon, when the town lay soft and sleepy after a fresh snowfall. Elly had left the balcony door cracked for air while she dried her climbing gear in the hallway. From the kitchen, she heard that same solid landing, followed by the faintest squeak of rubber as her boot shifted on the mat. Her body went rigid. Slowly, she leaned around the doorway and saw a shape on the green sofa, golden brown and still, staring straight at the TV's quiet black screen. It sat there as if it belonged, broad shoulders rising and falling with each calm breath. Ear tufts pricked toward the soft ticking of the radiator, pale whiskers catching the lamplight, huge paws tucked neatly under. It made the dent in the cushions look inevitable, as though the sofa had been waiting for that exact weight. For 3 heartbeats, Elly could not move. The wild shape turned its head a fraction, eyes brushing past her, then flowed to the floor in one smooth motion and walked toward the balcony door. By the time she lunged forward and slid the glass shut, it was already outside, standing in the snow as if it had always lived there. It looked back once through the glass, breath puffing a small bloom on the pane, then stepped lightly onto the balcony rail. A second later it was gone, disappearing up toward the rooftop in a spray of powder. Elly pressed both hands flat to the door, heart racing. Some wild mountain neighbor, she told herself. Just passing through. Nothing more. She spent the evening searching online, phone glowing cold against her fingers. Pictures of small-town strays did not match what she had seen. This was bigger, muscled like a ghost of the ridges, with spots and those impossible ear tufts. The word lynx came up again and again. People called their close relatives bobcats. They were not supposed to curl up on green sofas in rented apartments. It was just a quick look, Elly whispered. Probably won't happen again. But her eyes kept drifting to the dent still left in the cushions. Over the next week, a pattern emerged. On days when she opened the balcony just a crack, she would later find the faintest trace of large paws drying on the rug. Her climbing rope bag, left by the door, was sometimes nudged aside, as if inspected. Twice. She came home early from the shop and felt the presence leave the room before she turned on the light. The air still warm on the sofa. Her visitor seemed to favour late afternoons, when the sun slid sideways into the living room and painted the sofa in gold. One evening, curiosity outweighed fear. Elly returned from work, left the balcony door shut but the curtains slightly open, and turned off all the lights. She curled into a dining chair in the dim kitchen and waited, breathing slow. Snowlight seeped across the room. After what felt like hours, she heard a soft scuff on the rail, then the gentle rattle of glass as something tested the gap. Her broad face appeared at the pane, whiskers twitching, those same steady eyes searching the room. This time, it met her gaze through the reflection. The wild messenger did not flinch or run. Something in its expression was not quite challenge and not quite fear. It was measuring, deciding. Elly did not move, fingers wrapped tight around her mug. In the faint mirror of the glass, she saw herself, small and still, and behind that, the mountain-strong outline of the creature long ago mistaken for a dying kitten in the snow. Her throat tightened with memories she rarely allowed in. The animal's eyes drifted from her face to the green sofa, then back again. It huffed once, fogging the glass, and touched the pane with one massive paw, claws carefully sheathed. The motion was slow, deliberate, almost like a question. Then it turned and trotted along the balcony, vanishing around the corner toward the stairwell roof. Elly remained in the chair after it left, wondering why part of her had felt, for the first time in years, oddly expected. Years before that quiet standoff at the balcony, there had been only wind and white. Elly had been 24, all raw energy and untested rope, climbing with 2 friends along a ridge that caught clouds like a snagged sail. The storm came early, flattening the world into a grey blur. On the descent, they found a shape half buried near a rock outcrop, a frozen body with tufted ears stilled forever, flanks stiff under a crust of ice. Beside it, almost indistinguishable from the drift, something small trembled. At first, she thought it was a scrap of someone's hat, torn off and abandoned. Then it moved, a feeble push against the snow, a tiny cry swallowed by the wind. Elly dropped to her knees, gloves already soaked, and brushed carefully around it. A narrow face emerged, eyes barely open, breath coming in shallow, uneven pulls. She had never seen such delicate paws, each toe tipped with the promise of future strength. It did not feel like courage when she scooped the little life against her chest. It felt like instinct, pure and terrifying. Her partners shouted over the gale that it wouldn't make it, that they were far from the trailhead, that she was risking their timing. But Elly tucked the small body inside her jacket anyway, against the steady drum of her heart. Each step down the mountain, she felt the faint weight, sometimes limp, sometimes twitching. The ridge faded behind them. The world narrowed to boot prints and the wail of wind. When the storm finally broke, crimson sunset bled across distant peaks, and the tiny creature's breathing had steadied enough to warm a coin-sized patch on her shirt. In the following week, she became a constant at the town's tiny wildlife room behind the vet clinic. The old vet, Dr. Marshall, shook his head but helped anyway, calling in a rehabilitator from 2 towns over. The little survivor grew in a borrowed crate in Elly's kitchen at first, eyes opening to the sight of hanging climbing ropes and steaming mugs. Milk, careful warmth, rough towels. Every day was a fight against the lingering cold that had bitten so deep. Elly learned to read the faintest flick of ears and whiskers long before she knew what it meant for her own life. They didn't plan for attachment. The rehabilitator, a wiry woman named Jude, warned her from the start. "You're a bridge," she said, pouring formula into a bottle. "You help get him back to the wild he belongs to. Nothing more." Elly nodded, pretending her chest didn't ache when the small body burrowed into the crook of her elbow, when tiny teeth worried at the frayed cuff of her sweater. She knew the rule. Do not make yourself their world. Yet, each day, their worlds overlapped more, in quiet kitchens and snow-blanketed backyards. When the little one grew stronger, They moved him to an outdoor pen on the edge of town, near a stand of spruce. There he learned to stalk, to leap, to hide his growing bulk among fallen needles. Elly visited less often on purpose, watching from a distance as he bounded along logs, all pause and awkward grace. Once, when she turned to leave, he paced the fence, eyes following her with a focus that tightened her throat. She told herself it was food association, nothing more. Still, she lingered by the gate every time. The release, when it came, should have been pure celebration. Early spring, snow still patchy in the shadows. Jude opened the pen and stepped back. The young hunter hesitated only a heartbeat, then flowed through the gap like water returning to its stream. He never looked back. Elly stood between spruce trunks, fists jammed deep into her pockets, telling herself this was right. This was the entire purpose. But something in her rearranged that day, leaving a hollow she carried down the mountain and into every climbing season after. What she did not see were the seasons that followed from his side. Forest edges and cold streams, lean winters where prey was scarce, and summer nights rich with scent. The young wanderer learned territory lines and the hard language of survival. He saw headlights in the distance sometimes, heard the rumble of engines on the highway, smelled the scatter of food around campsites. Humans were best avoided. Their noises brought risk. Still, every so often, from a far ridge, he would catch the faint trace of chalk and wool and something that reminded him of borrowed kitchens and soft green fabric. Years passed. Elly climbed less after an accident took a friend on a distant route. The rope had held. The rock had not. Grief made the mountains feel heavy instead of holy. She moved apartments, took more shifts at the shop, learned to see the first grey at her temples in the mirror. The hollow from that spring day never quite closed. Somewhere above the tree line, a grown hunter patrolled his range, scars forming tidy pale lines beneath his coat. Trust, once learned, did not entirely die, but it cooled, buried under snow and distance. Neither of them expected their paths to cross again. On a bright afternoon, when the river broke free of its ice in noisy chunks, Elly came home early with a cardboard box of climbing holds for the shop. She kicked the door shut behind her, juggling the box on her hip, then froze. There, on the green sofa, sat the mountain-shaped visitor, calm as a photograph. Its coat glowed tawny in the late sun, darker spots scattered like leaves. One massive paw rested on the geometric cushion, claws completely hidden. The TV showed a looping nature scene of alpine meadows, muted but moving. For a long second, Neither of them moved. The animal's ear tufts flicked at the muffled shout from a game 2 floors down, then returned to her. Recognition bloomed in Elly's chest, unreasonable and fierce. Those eyes, wide set and gold, were not the same as the half-blind ones she had held to her heart years ago. Yet something in their steady inquiry felt familiar. The box slipped from her arms onto the rug, spilling plastic holds that clattered and rolled. The wild visitor did not flinch, only tilted its head, studying her. She expected it to bolt for the balcony. Instead, it slid down from the sofa with unhurried grace and padded toward her until there was only the length of the coffee table between them. It stopped, lowered its head, and drew in her scent with a long, deliberate breath. Elly's muscles sang with the urge to run and the urge to reach out. Slowly, she extended one hand, palm down, fingers trembling. "Hey," she whispered, voice catching. "You can't be him. That would be impossible." The great head leaned closer, whiskers brushing her knuckles lightly. Warm breath fell against her skin. Then, with a gentleness that made her eyes sting, the creature bumped its forehead once, firmly, against the back of her hand. Not a swipe, not a bite, a greeting. Something unlocked behind her ribs. A memory flooded up. A tiny body pushing at her wrist inside her jacket. Long ago, in a whiteout. The living weight in front of her now seemed to complete a circle she hadn't realized was open. From that day, the visits were no longer fleeting. The mountain neighbour began to appear each late afternoon, slipping in from the balcony when she was home, never when she was gone. He would make a slow circuit of the room, checking corners, sniffing her rope bag, then settle onto the green sofa as if clocking in for a shift. Elly learned the sound of his landing on the balcony rail, the soft thud that meant the apartment would not feel empty that evening. Her heart, used to being guarded, forgot to keep its distance. There were boundaries. She never cornered him, never shut the balcony door when he was inside. Food remained outdoors, where she left discreet cuts of meat at the edge of the parking lot, away from neighbours' windows. In town, people began to murmur about a large, spotted bobcat seen near the old brick building on Oak Street. Some were delighted, some uneasy. Elly kept quiet, fingers tightening on her grocery bag when she overheard. The secret felt too fragile to expose to casual fear. The clearest signal came one evening as light faded pink over the ridge. Elly sat on the sofa with her journal open. The wild visitor stretched out along the cushions, back against her legs. A siren wailed briefly on the main road, then cut off. The big body tensed, ears pricked. He rose, stepped off the sofa, and moved to the balcony door, looking back at her with an intensity that felt like language. He tapped the glass once with his paw, then again, gaze holding hers. "You want out?" she asked, standing. When she slid the door open, he did not immediately leave. Instead, he stepped aside, leaving a clear path for her to the balcony. Then he moved ahead, crossing to the rail, looking down toward the street. Elly followed slowly, heart beating in her throat. Below, headlights crawled past. People trudged along the sidewalk. The world as ordinary as any evening. Yet the animal stayed poised on the rail, glancing between her and a particular corner by the crosswalk, as if insisting she see something she was missing. Nothing alarming happened that night. No accident. No loud confrontation. Still, the way he had drawn her to the balcony lodged in her mind. It felt deliberate, purposeful, as though he believed she should understand some unseen pattern unfolding below. As she watched him leap silently up toward the roof, snowflakes beginning to drift again, she whispered the name she had never said aloud. "You found me," she said to the empty balcony. "Or you came back. Either way, I see you." The fragile beginning between them settled into something real, though full meaning still lay ahead. Winter returned with teeth that year. A late storm sweeping down from the peaks and swallowing the town in swirling white. The day it hit hardest, Elly was closing up the climbing shop early. Customers had hurried home hours before, leaving boot tracks and the smell of wet wool behind. The owner tapped the window, watching the street disappear. "You walking up Oak?" he asked. "Be careful. Folks drive like they're on dry pavement." Elly zipped her jacket higher and tried not to think about the wild companion who sometimes shadowed her route. By the time she reached her building, the wind was funneling down the street, pushing at her legs like a living thing. She saw him before anything else. A large, familiar outline sitting directly at the corner of the crosswalk, fur dusted with snow, tail tip flicking. He faced the slope of the road where cars occasionally skidded, eyes bright in the storm. "What are you doing out here?" she murmured as she approached, glancing around to see who might be watching. His ears twitched toward her voice, but he didn't move from the spot. A pickup truck slid slightly as it turned, tires hissing on the slick asphalt. The driver corrected, muttered something through the half-open window, and stared openly at the guardian shape stationed near the curb. "That thing yours?" he shouted toward Elly over the wind. His tone was more accusation than question. Elly shook her head automatically, but her body moved closer to the animal, interposing herself without thinking. Hez, just passing through, She called back. Storms got everyone confused. Over the next hour, the street became a shallow river of slush. Elly watched from her balcony as her visitor paced a tight circuit at that same corner, pausing whenever a car approached too fast. Body tense, gaze fixed. Twice, he stepped forward, forcing drivers to slow and swerve wide, curses disappearing into the storm. A neighbour from the second floor, Tom, leaned over his own railing and shook his head. "That wild thing's gonna get itself killed," he said, "or scare somebody into calling animal control." The call came sooner than she expected. 2 days later, when the storm had settled into steady grey, a white county truck pulled up outside. A wildlife officer stepped out, jacket marked with the state crest. Elly watched from behind her curtain as he walked to the sidewalk, scanning for tracks. When he buzzed the building, she knew exactly who he was there about. She met him in the entryway, heart thudding. "You've had reports," he said without preamble. "A large spotted animal, too comfortable around people, that ring any bells." She could have lied cleanly. Instead, the memory of a tiny body against her chest on a mountain years ago loosened her tongue. "I've seen him," she admitted. "He comes through sometimes. He hasn't hurt anyone." The officer's expression tightened. Not unkind, but firm. "Yet," he said, "these animals are powerful. Folks get nervous. Kids walk this street to the bus stop. My job's to keep both sides safe." He handed her a card with a number for a sanctuary 2 valleys over. "If you have a bond, like you imply, you might be the one who can coax him into a crate." That night, her visitor arrived later than usual. He slipped in from the balcony with a shake of snow, trotted a familiar loop around the living room, then hopped lightly onto the green sofa. The TV glowed with a nature documentary. Ridges, pines, the very sort of world Head left. Elly sat beside him, knees drawn up, sanctuary brochure crumpled in her hand. "They want you gone," she said quietly. "Somewhere with fences and more of your own kind. Maybe that's better. Maybe I've been selfish." His only answer was a slow blink and the deep, steady weight of his head settling on her thigh. Over the next week, his behaviour shifted. He spent less time stretched in relaxed luxury and more time near the balcony, ears tuned to the street. When she approached the door with her coat on, he often rose and blocked her path, not aggressively but firmly, planting his broad body across the threshold. If she stepped over him, he would follow, shadowing her first few strides down the sidewalk. eyes flicking constantly toward that same crosswalk corner. Something in his vigilance dug under her skin. This was not random wandering. He was guarding against what she still did not know. The tension in the building thickened. Tom grumbled in the stairwell about that overgrown predator, claiming it had startled his grandkids. Someone left a folded note under her door. Keep your pet under control, or someone else will. Her cheeks burned reading it, though she had never put a collar on the animal, never dared call him hers out loud. Each complaint pushed the sanctuary pamphlet closer to the front of her mind. Each time he brushed against her leg or bumped her hand with that deliberate forehead, the thought of letting him go tightened into something almost unbearable. On a brittle, bright morning, she watched from the balcony as schoolchildren clustered at the corner below, breath-forming clouds, backpacks bright against the snow. Her guardian neighbour sat a few yards away, body coiled, eyes on the road. A sedan came too fast around the bend, tyres crunching on old ice. Without warning, the animal stepped up onto the crosswalk, a living barrier of muscle and fur. The car braked hard, sliding but stopping short. The driver leaned out, face flushed with anger. He shouted, words lost in distance, then kicked slush toward the big body. Elly's hand already reached for the balcony handle, knowing this line, once crossed, would demand a decision from her shed been avoiding for too long. The incident everyone would talk about later began in small pieces. Like most turning points, Elly threw on her boots without lacing them, heart hammering as she ran down the stairs. By the time she reached the street, the driver had already stepped out of the sedan, breath puffing in short bursts. The wild guardian stood in the slush, unflinching, tail low, eyes steady. Between them, the crosswalk lines disappeared under dirty snow. Children watched from the sidewalk, hushed and wide-eyed. You almost hit those kids, Elly said, sliding between the man and the animal without fully deciding to. Her own breath came fast, fogging the air. The driver jabbed a finger toward the guardian. I braked because of that thing, he snapped. It's dangerous. Should have been gone long ago. Somebody's got to scare it off. His boot shifted, snow squeaking, leg drawing back in the universal language of a kick. Behind her, she felt the big body tense, claws still hidden but weight shifting. She didn't think about teeth or claws or how quickly a wild creature could react. Her body moved on the same instinct that had once made her scoop up a shivering scrap in a storm. Elly stepped directly into the path of the man's rising boot, hand catching his leg at the shin. The impact jolted up her arm, but she held, voice low and steady. No, she said. Not shouted, not pleaded, just a word, shaped like a boundary. You don't touch him. You keep your anger where it belongs. On the ice. On the weather. Not on him. There was a brief, electric silence. The children huddled back, a teacher drawing them away. The driver hesitated, caught between his momentum and the unexpected resistance. The guardian behind her did not lunge, did not snarl. Instead, he shifted closer so that his flank brushed lightly against the back of her calves. A living wall. She could feel the deep drum of his heart through her boots. Steady, unafraid. When the man finally lowered his foot, muttering, the tension seemed to slide off the crosswalk like meltwater. You're going to get someone hurt. Keeping that beast around. The driver spat, but his voice had lost some force. Call whoever you need to, but it doesn't belong on this street. He climbed back into the sedan, tires spinning briefly before gripping. The car rolled away, leaving twin ruts and a ringing quiet. Elly stood still until the guardian eased forward, nudging her hand with his broad head. Only then did she let herself breathe fully. When she looked down at him, the pattern finally came into focus. He had always watched this corner, always stepped between fast cars and soft bodies, always blocked her path when conditions were worst. In her mind, memories rearranged. Headlights slicing snow the day she found him. The roaring wind. The way human danger and natural danger blurred together. He had learned something from those years at the forest edge and from the borrowed kitchens of his youth. Where humans gathered, lines needed guarding. That had been his invisible work all along. The county officer's truck arrived later that afternoon, summoned by someone's call. Elly met him on the sidewalk, the guardian sitting a yard away, calm once more. She expected an ultimatum. Instead, the officer listened as the teacher from that morning recounted how the big animal had stepped out before the rushing car. A murmuring cluster of parents nodded. Anxiety and gratitude tangled in their faces. Still wild, the officer said at last, looking from the gathered people to Elly. Still not simple, but maybe not the villain of this story. They talked about options that were more nuanced than cages and ultimatums. Extra signs at the bend, a lower speed limit, bright paint on the crosswalk lines come spring, a community meeting where people could voice their fears and hear from those who had seen the guardian's calmer side. The sanctuary invitation remained on the table, but no longer as a punishment, more a future choice, to be made if his presence ever shifted from protector to liability. For now, the officer agreed to hold off, provided there were no incidents. That night, The town buzzed quietly. Some called him a menace, others a hero. Someone made a joke online about a giant bobcat crossing guard. Elly ignored the noise and focused on the living reality in her apartment. She sat on the green sofa, muscles finally unclenching, while the guardian sprawled beside her, head heavy in her lap. On the TV, mountains rolled past in slow aerial shots. She stroked the thick fur along his neck, feeling old fear loosen. "I get it now," she whispered. "This isn't just you visiting because you remember the kitchen. You're still working. You never stopped." As if in answer, he shifted, placing one massive paw over her wrist, claws barely emerging, the gentlest of holds. His breathing slowed, matching hers. Outside, cars passed more cautiously, word of the incident already altering habits. Inside, something settled into place that had been misaligned for years. Her sense of purpose, of partnership, no longer tied to cliffs and ropes, but to a stretch of ordinary street and a wild heart that had chosen, inexplicably, to share it. The weeks after the street incident unfolded with a quieter kind of intensity. Changes crept in at the edges of daily life. The town council installed a bright yellow sign near the crosswalk, a painted silhouette of a leaping wild shape next to the usual child figure. Some laughed at it, but most slowed their cars. On frosty mornings, Elly often spotted her guardian sitting in his usual place as she left for the shop, tail curled neatly around his paws, watching traffic with the steady patience of someone on duty. Their home rhythm deepened. Each evening, after her shift, she would climb the stairs, listening for the now familiar thud on the balcony rail. Sometimes he arrived first, waiting by the sliding door with a dusting of snow on his fur. Other times, he appeared a few minutes later, slipping in from the rooftop with the grace that had once carried him between spruce trunks. He would do his rounds, sniff the boots, inspect the rope bag, glance at the TV, and then claim his spot on the green sofa, leaving a generous but deliberate space for her beside him. She talked more now, words flowing into the warm lamplight and steady breathing, not expecting answers, just trusting the comfort of being heard. She told him about customers at the shop, about aching knees that reminded her she wasn't 24 anymore, about dreams in which she still clung to impossible overhangs. Sometimes, when a particular memory pressed too hard her friend's empty harness, the white stretch of the ridge the day she found him, her voice would falter. On those nights, he shifted closer, resting his head across her legs, weight anchoring her to the present. Saturdays brought a new ritual. In mid-morning light, when the street was quiet, she and the guardian would walk together as far as the small park 2 blocks down. he stayed a pace ahead or behind, never on a leash, yet always in tune with her steps. Children pointed and squealed from a safe distance. Parents watched warily but did not pull them away. The county officer, passing one day, simply tipped his hat and reminded a group of teenagers not to throw anything toward the big animal. Fear had not vanished, but it had softened into respect. At the climbing shop, Elly found herself telling the gateway version of their story to out-of-towners. How a wild neighbour sometimes watched over the kids at the corner. How slowing down for him had reduced near misses. She kept the mountain rescue part mostly to herself, a private thread woven through their shared days. Yet even the small public version seemed to lighten her co-workers. You and your ridge guardian, the owner teased once. Stacking helmets. Guess some folks retire from the cliffs to street duty. She smiled, realizing it wasn't entirely wrong. Inside the apartment, evidence of his presence accumulated like gentle graffiti. The arm of the sofa bore faint claw marks where he stretched in his sleep. The geometric cushion had a permanent sag where his chin liked to rest. A few pale hairs glimmered on the dark rug no matter how often she vacuumed. She stopped seeing them as mess and started seeing them as signatures. Proof that her life now included a thread of the wild woven safely through its fabric. They ended most evenings the same way. She would turn the TV to a channel showing distant landscapes, ridges, forests, rivers that resembled the world he came from. Soft lamplight wrapped the room. He would curl along the sofa, sometimes with his back pressed against hers, sometimes stretched with paws extended, almost touching the coffee table. Elly would rest her hand on his side, feeling the rise and fall that had once been so fragile in her arms. Their shared ritual grew not from obligation but from a mutual, quiet choice. To be here, together, in this strange, ordinary miracle. One night, as the screen showed a summer meadow high above timberline, Elly realized the hollow she had carried since that spring release years ago no longer ached in the same way. It was still part of her, a scar rather than an open wound. The difference was simple and profound. She had not been replaced, but joined. The wildlife she once feared she had abandoned had looped back, not as a dependent creature needing saving, but as a partner with his own work, his own paths, choosing her green sofa as his resting place between duties. Spring came in earnest, washing the last dirty snow from the gutters and turning the hills a soft, impossible green. On mornings when the light slanted just right into the living room, the guardian's coat almost matched the sofa, tawny on green, spots like dappled shade. Elly would sit beside him with her coffee, windows cracked to let in the smell of thawing earth and distant pine. The town moved at its usual small pace outside, but inside, time felt luxuriously slow. They developed one more ritual, almost without noticing. Each evening, just before sunset, they would stand together on the balcony for a few quiet minutes. He would rest his front paws on the rail, body stretching long, ears pricked toward the ridge. She would lean against the doorframe, following his gaze. Sometimes, far off, she thought she heard distant calls, thin threads of sound from others of his kind. His tail would flick once, twice, acknowledging without restless longing. Then he would hop down and walk back inside, choosing the sofa, the lamp, the familiar hum of the TV. Elly kept a small box on the shelf by the door now. Inside lay a folded sanctuary pamphlet, yellowing at the edges, and a worn scrap of the wool shirt she'd been wearing the day she found him in the storm. She didn't look at the paper often, but she didn't throw it away either. To her, it had become a symbol not of an inevitable ending, but of an ongoing promise. If a day ever came when this town could no longer hold him safely, she would not betray his trust. She would walk with him into whatever safe place was next. For now, he was simply here. On good days and bad, after long shifts and short ones, on evenings when her joints ached, and ones when she still felt like racing the river trail. She could rely on the soft thud on the balcony, the heavy warmth on the green cushions. Friends came by occasionally and sat amazed, voices dropping to respectful whispers. The elderly neighbour across the hall took to leaving scratches of roast meat on a plate by the stairwell, claiming he hated the idea of that big fellow going hungry. The guardian accepted such offerings with calm dignity, then always returned to Elly's side. Sometimes, when she closed up the shop and saw strangers snapping photos at the painted sign near the crosswalk, she would smile but keep walking. The stories they told about the famous giant Bobcat crossing guard of Oak Street were theirs to share, embellished and second-hand. The story she lived was quieter, written in shared silences, in steady breathing on long winter nights, in the weight that leaned just enough against her when old memories threatened to pull her back up cold, dangerous slopes. On a soft June evening, the TV showed a distant view of her ridge, snow lingering only in high-shadowed pockets. She sat on the sofa, the guardian sprawled along its length, one paw resting over her ankle. The lamp cast a gentle pool of light. The world beyond the windows glowed blue. Elly let her hand rest on his shoulder, feeling the age there now still powerful, but no longer the restless force of youth. "We got each other through," she murmured, not expecting him to understand the words themselves. His ear flicked toward her, and he exhaled, long and content. the future would come as it always did, with new storms and bright mornings, with eventual goodbyes that no one could outrun. But tonight, in the quiet living room of a small mountain town, a woman and a once wild guardian shared a sofa and a life. The crossroads outside lay calm. The ridge stood watch in the distance. Elly felt no hollow in her chest, only a grounded warmth. "I'm glad you found your way back," she whispered. The steady rise and fall beneath her palm was answer enough. Neither of them, anymore, had to face their chosen watch alone. If this story touched your heart, drop a simple 1 in the comments to let us know you were here. Your support keeps these gentle stories alive. Don't forget to subscribe and stay with us, because the next story might just be the one that finds you when you least expect it.